Hello, everyone. Dear colleagues, thank you for taking time today and joining us at this workshop for PRR practitioners and diplomats. The workshop aims to share good and promising practices of rehabilitation and reintegration of children returnees in Central Asia. As you know, thousands of children with links to ISIS have been held in camps in northern Syria and also in prisons in Iraq. International organizations estimate that about 43,000 children are living in Al-Hol and Rosh camps these days, and 30% of them are third nationals. While the United Nations is urging countries to repatriate and children should be priority, so far the repatriation efforts have been slow. Today, we will focus on the experiences of Central Asian countries, where 4 countries repatriated hundreds of children from Syria and Iraq. Dear participants, I think some of you should unmute. I think there is a noise. Please. And the workshop has been organized by the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations. The Bulan Institute is a research institute based in Geneva, Switzerland, with a regional office in Bishkek. Our mission is to promote peace, security, and human rights in Central Asia, Eurasia, South Asia through research, advocacy, and dialogue building. The workshop aims to identify and share good practices in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. So today we have 4 speakers and hope that we can address all challenges, limitations, and also at the same time, mainly good practices of rehabilitation and reintegration. So first, we will listen to our speakers, then we will have Q&A session. So to all participants, please keep your microphone and cameras off for the entirety of the discussion. And also please choose a language, English or Russian. So we'll start our workshop with Kyrgyzstan. Recently, Kyrgyz authorities announced that they identified all citizens currently being held in prisons and camps in Iraq and Syria. So now, in the official list, they have names of 400 women and children. So let's hope that they will be repatriated. But today we will discuss already existing experience of Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan repatriated 79 children from Iraqi prisons in March 2021. And we have today with us Ms. Yildiz Dushenova, Director of Public Foundation Future of Kyrgyzstan, Future of the country. She is an expert on education, development, and children protection. She worked with UNICEF for several years, supporting the project on community-based education management and information system. She also worked in inclusive education projects, having developed and facilitated trainings. Yildiz was a member of expert group in Kyrgyzstan, which was responsible for organizing schooling and reintegration of children repatriated from Iraq. Yildiz, could you please share with us Kyrgyzstan's experience and promising practices in schooling and reintegration of children into school environments? So you have a floor, please, Yildiz.
Good afternoon, dear participants of the workshop. In fact, I am the head of the Public Foundation Future of the country, and the activity of fund has been within the project support to children of repatriants. In the reintegration process to formal schooling, it's a small part of all the work that has been conducted so far in the country. Number of partners have been involved. I will speak only about our component, namely the integration into formal education and schooling. The project was financed by the European Union under the technical support of the UNICEF in Kyrgyzstan. We have been working with 79 children who were repatriated from Iraq. Our team consisted of experts in the educational system, special pedagogues, logopedicians, defectology psychologists, as we have had different age of children involved. We have had preschool children and primary school students and secondary and higher school. So some of them were above 18 age. That is why we had to find an approach that would be relevant to all the age groups. Expert team decided that we will make such an approach as we have done it in the inclusive program, and we will be looking at children from the point of their educational needs. That is why first step that we have done by the project team is the individual assessment of the educational needs. Experts have worked with each child to understand what is the situation in this particular case with this individual child. What are we speaking about? We mean that we should understand the needs in order to develop proper recommendations. And based on this schooling assessment, we have conducted a development of plan for individual development. And in order to have the children recruited into the schooling system, should see support from teachers, from the families of guides, and we have contracted certain training. I will tell about each stage briefly first and then go into detail. Special education for teachers and social pedagogues, how to work with this individual educational plan, what needs are for children in each case, what the teacher should understand, how he should treat, what situation may raise and how to solve them. And the role of the formal education is very important. What issues should be taken with more interest and most care? It was a short-term training. Twice we have trained our teachers in 3 days, special for parents, for guardians or custodians. And we have made WhatsApp group, use that for each time when we have had once a week online training, consulting, monitoring was at the places in field visits. Half a year after the project implementation, the part of individual plans were closed because children have achieved the goals. They were integrated and adapted to the system of oral schooling. This was shown by the assessment made with teachers and feedback from the guards, tutors by children as well. But part of children has still is still left non-integrated because there was a big gap in education. That is why after consultation with the experts, there was a decision made for those children for achieving the goals inside the project framework. There were additional services provided. For each child, we have hired tutors on 2 basic subjects, language and mathematics. And within half a year, children have been regularly getting these educational services from their teachers and tutors. After completion of the school year, we have made conclusions and say that children were successful all. There were no cases where the children were not adopted or integrated with other children. There were no critical situations, and expert group was working to see in advance what the challenges might be and try to prevent them. This is briefly about what has been done. Now let's turn to the grounds of the individual plan, how the assessment was conducted. So by special areas, communications, speech, physical training, cognitive, recognitional development, social, emotional development, and actual relevant level in academic success, reading, writing, mathematics as main aspects for school children, and children of preschool age were just about communication and speech, physical development, cognitive development, social, emotional development. We have been looking at the state standards, what the child in the certain age under the state standard should know and be able to do what skills he should have. The results by assessment of children who were involved in this process and other actors, tutors, teachers, members of the educational departments, and they are more than satisfactory. The main focus in education we have been doing on empathy for all people who will be doing social pedagogical support would be empathetic so that they understand what their personal stereotypes can lead to, how to identify them, how not to give the environment to discriminate the child, what should be special attention on, and social pedagogues have been involved as people who were conducting a monitoring what's going on, what are the developments of the child. They were personal monitoring, interviews, visits to their houses, to their families. So we see the satisfactory results because of such an approach. It was a partnership, an approach for having involved the public foundation, the state, the community. That's the model we have developed, and I believe that there was a positive feedback. Chulpon, please inform how much time still I have. Chulpon.
More 2-3 minutes, please.
Here I should note that the position of the state was on the side of a child. We have been looking at the existing normative bylaws, normative acts. Nothing new was involved. It was within the existing legal framework. It was just the advocacy, not advocacy still, but it's just the assessment within the existing reality. And facilitation, promotion was with the educational ministry for enrollment of children into preschool, school, institutions, and we have been following the inclusive education methods as part of the concept for educational development. And children were enrolled in those classes where they have their peers, same age children. It was just very exceptional cases when children have been studying 1 year later than others. That's the main point. So thank you very much for your attention. That's brief about our project, and I'm ready to answer any of your questions. Once more, I would like to mention it was just a small part of our project. It's not the work only of our foundation, but it was a teamwork with involvement of many actors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yildiz, for your first-hand insights and your contribution, professionalism, and hard work on this issue. I think Kyrgyzstan had unique opportunity as it had a chance to learn from the experiences of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. One very positive outcome that I would like to highlight, Kyrgyzstan managed to find guardians for each child. Kyrgyz authorities conducted thorough work with relatives, identifying them and closely working them to prepare to accept these children. From the beginning, Kyrgyzstan set 2 conditions to be met for a child to be repatriated. First condition is mother's consent, who is serving her term in the Iraqi prison, to send her child back to Kyrgyzstan. And second condition was having a close relative who can adopt that child, who confirms officially. So now all 79 children are living with their grandparents or other close relatives. And guardians also had many trainings, meetings to get prepared. And of course, still they have many issues like burnout, and specialists are making efforts to help them. So let's move to the next country. In May 2019, Tajikistan repatriated 84 children from Iraqi prisons. And on 26th of July, I think it was 25th of July, About 10 days ago, Tajikistan repatriated 104 children and 42 women from Al-Hol and Rosh camps. Today, we have with us Ms. Farzona Sharifzoda, psychologist from Tajikistan. She is a leading specialist in the field of modern Islamic studies at the Islamic Studies Center under the President of Republic of Tajikistan. As a practical psychologist in cognitive behavioral therapy, she was involved in assisting returnee children repatriated from Iraq. She also works as a coordinator of project Adolescents are Partners of Sustainable Development implemented by NGO Initiative Youth of Tajikistan. Dear Ms. Farzona Sharifzoda, thank you for joining us today. Could you please tell us how you worked with children repatriated from Iraq and what kind of outcomes you can share with us and what kind of psychological assistance you provided? The floor is yours.
Добрый вечер, дорогие участники. Очень рада приветствовать всех вас.
Good afternoon, dear participants. I'm very
Farzona,
glad to...
извините, ваше видео отключено. Пожалуйста. Вот. Спасибо. Продолжайте.
Добрый вечер, дорогие коллеги.
Good evening, dear participants, dear colleagues. I'm very glad to greet you all at this workshop and share our experience that we have obtained thanks to the work on rehabilitation with children returnees. I have been in the commission under the Committee on Women's and Family Affairs under the government of Republic of Tajikistan when there were 84 children returned from the Syria, Iraq conflict zones, war zones. There was a special commission established and the Ministry of Internal Affairs was in charge, plus the Ministry of Education of Tajikistan, who have composed the main part of the commission, and we have had such specialists as psychologists, social workers, specially trained teachers who have adapted children to social and public life and adaptation for continuing their education in public schools. There was a lot of job conducted. We worked with many children of different ages. We have also worked with their mothers. Some of them were repatriated. Some of children were repatriated with children. So when children arrive to Tajikistan, they have been accommodated in several special camps. And while they were undergoing their rehabilitation process, they lived in those camps. Under the Committee of the Women's Affairs, there was also a commission from the number of 2 social workers and 2 psychologists, who, one of them a young. They were different age children, preschool, junior, primary school, adolescents, children who were undergraduates of school. So with children of younger age, it was easier. They were easier to contact, though they have had very strong language barriers because they were just newborns, and some of them were born in countries where they have been repatriated from. So they came back when they have lived for a couple of years and have forgotten their mother tongue. There were a lot of gaps in their education to some elementary counting, letters. They were not aware on how to contact with ordinary children of the same age, with people surrounding them, because as we know, they have lived in a very specific environment, community, with older age children, with teenagers. It was more difficult to conduct our work. They were not very open to contact. They have built their barriers, obstacles, because they have had their own religious beliefs that all around are kafirs, and only those who are from their community are the right people on the earth, so that education and ordinary life is something not good for them. They didn't want to get out of their comfort zone where they used to live thanks to their religious beliefs. There were different psychological methods, including with children of young age, early age, and preschool. As I have mentioned, it was easier to work with early age children. And there were also group therapy, art therapy, individual therapy conducted.
С теми детьми, у которых родители, то есть мама рядом, с ними тоже были такие групповые терапии, и были хорошие результаты. На сегодняшний день дети уже размещены в разных интернатах. Не все нашли своих опекунов.
So not all of the children have been identified with the guardians, and it was difficult to find relatives to document and to register as guardians, but there is regular monitoring for children who have been returned, are registered with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. They regularly conduct monitoring about their studies, about their behavior, social behavior. So there is monitoring. In each boarding school, there is a social worker for those children who are not in the families, and the psychologist who works with those particular children who have been without the support of the relatives, but they were specialists assigned by the government of the Tajik Republic. Now in Tajikistan, there is no unified methodology for working with such children. There are different methods used, and there is no concrete one methodology. As a psychologist, I can say that each child who was there is a need for an individual approach by one template or sample. The method should be one, should not be one and the same. It's not possible to use techniques, one technique to one and the same child. And those children who are above 18, who have certain results in their school studies, can get the boarding accommodation facility. There is also quota for them, how they can enter the universities and continue their studies. Children are adopted. They have been learned how to adapt to public life, and boarding schools, the environment where they will be living. We have also conducted consulting and psychological support, so the children could adapt them as their usual peers, ordinary,
Какие-то не устраивает, чтобы не возникало конфликтов.
to avoid bullying, to avoid any conflicts in the boarding schools. And according to our observations, children have been adapting very good. Children try to be friendly with them, those who are their classmates, roommates. They sometimes even help with their studies, and any other assistance is provided to a child who has been involved in this program, and to help him in his education.
Если есть вопросы, я готова.
So if you have any questions, please ask. Thank you very much for your attention and time.
Чолпон, меня слышно?
Cholpon, can you hear us?
Sorry.
Cholpon?
Thank you very much, Ms. Farzona Sharifzoda. We will have a Q&A session, and I'm sure there will be many questions about the experience of Tajikistan. And indeed, compared to Kyrgyzstan, for example, Tajikistan repatriated earlier and in 2019 and had a little chance for interstate exchange and learning. However, Tajikistan has been using its previous experience of dealing with post-conflict trauma as the country experienced civil war before. I hope for the next group of returnees, Tajikistan will have more opportunities for interstate exchange. Also, I hope that Tajikistan will involve civil society organizations into the process. So now let's turn to Kazakhstan. Among Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan's experience is very unique. This country carried out big-scale repatriation operations, bringing back 722 citizens. And today we have with us our colleague from Kazakhstan, Mr. Almat Nuradinov. He is a professor of Gumilov Eurasian National University in Astana. He is an associate professor of the Department of Sociopedagogics and Psychology. Mr. Nuradinov was one of the practitioners who worked with returnee children and conducted first psychological assessments. And also these days, UNICEF is implementing a special project on returnees jointly with Gumilov University. And so Professor Nuradinov has been involved as a leading expert. So Mr. Nuradinov, floor is yours, and could you tell us more about your experience working with children returnees and also about your current project with UNICEF? Thank you very much. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with such a good workshops. A couple of words. I'm the PhD of the university. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I have relevant attitude relation to this subject. First of all, since 2010, I have been dealing with the terrorism and extremism problems. There are some monographs, articles devoted to this subject, because we now speak about children as a certain group who have been involved in these areas. That is why when we have started reintegration, the returning process and the adaptation camp, there were a number of experts and I was one of them. So I was initially in Aktau when they have been in this adaptation camp. From the very beginning, so we have had several humanitarian operations, so-called Jusan and Rusafa. 595 in 2019 from Syria were repatriated. So there are some of them. Rusafa is program of repatriation from Iraq. And there was a question, what to do with them now, afterwards, after they have been returned, how to rehabilitate, reintegrate them to the Kazakh society. There were a number of challenges met. Now, after having some like 3 years after this, we can say that there were several stages. What has been done for rehabilitation and reintegration of children and women. So, as you know, Kazakhstan has returned women and children who have been in the zone of the terroristic activity. This is the ZTA in Russian. It's a term. We do not say children returned from Syria or Iraq. We have this special abbreviation, zones of terroristic activity, ZTA. So at the first stage, the first adaptation was in Aktau. Within 1 month, there is a camp. Children and experts, psychologists were there with them. Further process was the place of residence of the child. They were not kept separately from their families, their relatives, or with their mothers. They have been reintegrated and further rehabilitated at their place of accommodation and residence. There were some ethics taken into account. Children who were born in the ZTA at the high level, they have been registered as born in Kazakhstan, because in order to avoid stigmatization in future, to avoid the psychological traumatization of children, they were registered as born in Kazakhstan. Third stage was for further work on reintegration and identifying the psychological trauma of children, because as you understand, they have post-traumatic stress syndrome observed, and it can be obvious during their life cycle, because children suffer very much from that. I will later speak about this in more detail. So what was done in Aktau? There were, as you can see on this slide, I will provide some additional information. So upon arrival, we have tried to arrange comfortable conditions, so to be more friendly, no negative attitude shown to them in relation to children and women. And in the camp, we have had psychologists, religious specialists, theologists, pedagogues, social workers. Each of them have had their function, and they have provided certain services, clothing, medical checkups, and genetic expertise to identify the so to prove the DNA with mother. And what was requested? The following types of work: social support, urgent psychological help. It was not actually requested from the very beginning, but I can say that first time when they have come, they were very stressed, having hearing the sounds of taking off airplane, explosions, or some other sounds that could remind them of the bomb explosions. We have had public organizations, psychologists who have been involved, and those who have been working with them, the following public funds are in Prava, Shans, Aknient. They have had their own tasks, and they have been working jointly. Psychologists work, Gulnasa Razdikova, she's from Pavlodar, she is a theologist professor, and she was very actively involved in the, and Mr. Shapoval, Yulia Vasilyevna. A lot of thanks to them. They have done a great job. We are still in contact with them, and we share experience and impressions of that experience. There are new experiences. What were the problems that we have had? I have identified the challenges in rehabilitation and rehabilitation. First is the assessment of the psychological and somatic. It's more or less clear for medical specialists, genetic, some other blood tests, but for assessment of the mental state of children, there were some difficulties. I would like to note those traditional methodics were not actually successful. Diagnostic interview. I'm the clinical psychologist. I have met with those children who have no education, who have big gaps in education, but they still have some intellectual skills. We have tried to address these issues as well. If the intellectual capacity is still preserved in a child. He should achieve that level of education, and we were fully aware and understood that they have been three.
И вот их статус, да, тоже как, вот что было, да, тоже, и что дальше с ними делать, вот попытались выяснить там же и потребности, да, тоже, вот, что дальше с этими детьми можно делать по месту жительства. Вот, и большая трудность, как вы понимаете, да, уже это отсутствие опыта работы вот уже у психологов, социальных педагогов с такими детьми. Прямо на ходу мы там буквально учились уже. Ну, в принципе, наверное, по опыту, по возрасту я был самый старший, как бы, тоже, то есть по уровню образования, наверное, да, ты уже это. И я вот консультировал тех же психологов, которые работают там, тоже, вот вместе со мной работали, тоже, это. И, соответственно, да, тоже то, что мы ищем, да, тоже, ну, нету всяких методических пособий, потому что я знаком вот, ну, с теми вот публикациями, с большинством, наверное, публикаций в области экстремизма и терроризма, потому что по всему миру, потому что я их отслеживаю, как бы, да, тоже, но, к сожалению, мы подходящего ничего не нашли. Только есть определенный опыт, и то к нам не очень сильно подходит, да, тоже, скажем так, да, тоже опыт России, вот по Беслану тоже, те, которые работали. Но мы по крупицам собирались и пытались вот все это сделать, уже это как бы, да, тоже поставить на основу. И, соответственно, это, можем сказать, да, тоже как все это в рамках вот уже закона, потому что это вот международные правовые нормы и стандарты, которые есть, да, тоже.
Standards, national and international, something that we have been using in our work. This is Declaration on Human Rights, UN Convention on Human Rights.
Да-да-да.
Please continue.
Ага. Хорошо, хорошо. Хорошо, понял.
Извините, Cholpon, pardon me, I've just asked to read out the laws.
Okay.
So the national laws of Kazakhstan, this is Convention on the Children Rights ratified, terms of rehabilitation periods, 1 year, then also there is special regulations and laws. The most important was the interaction between the state bodies of the Republic of Kazakhstan. I have mentioned here the committee, the National Security Committee of the Republic of Kazakhstan, Committee on Children Right Protection. The National Security have then delegated the Committee on the Ministry of Education. Those children then further monitored and accompanied by the local administrations, district level. And then, of course, they have the three lower bodies are the social protection in each province, then the educational departments and the healthcare departments. They have been coordinating their work jointly, and the organizational issues have been decided, solved at places. As to the status of health, social support of the child, about his education, schooling, all these issues have been solved in coordination. And this experience showed that it was a very good, positive outcome. Then, what was conducted? What we have done, psychological services, diagnostics, first of all, and personality review, then support, psychological support, patronage, like systematic observation, psychological support of the children, psychological counseling. I have worked with women and children, with mothers. and their children. And they were aimed at rehabilitation. First of all, this is the social rehabilitation and adaptation in the center of Aktau, then to refer continued social rehabilitation and adaptation to the regional centers at their place of residence. The educational departments were coordinating this work, and then the work where the child is living at place of his residence, ongoing work for further rehabilitation and reintegration with psychologists to correct their behavioral deviations. So this is ongoing work. We have certain normative legal acts regulating such activities. State bodies are involved, educational departments, healthcare, social, and also funds like UNICEF, UN Women, and other public organizations, both local and national. We work with them together. There are still a lot of problems. The problems are what we want to have in future for those children who have been returned from the zones of terroristic activity to become non-vulnerable, no stigmatization, bullying, and to help them overcome the psychological trauma consequences. There are certain difficulties. The problem of human resources maybe at places, psychologists, pedagogues, social pedagogues, they have been working with lack of experience, but they have managed quite well with those tasks assigned to them. So if to look concretely, then there are no specialists concretely working with such children, or those who work at the required level, teachers. As to the inclusive education, we have not been looking into this aspect much. We see that there is need for enhancement for teachers' skills and capacities, capacity building for those who will be working, those specialists who will be accompanying those children during their life cycle. Social pedagogues, school psychologists, teachers, those who are at school. And one of the problem is, and the government also recognizes that problem, we have decided to establish a national center, a resource center, national center for resource groups. UNICEF and our institute jointly, theologists, social workers are working in this center for resource groups. So such a center has been established in order to directly address pending issues. During the 6 months, we have conducted quite a big scope of work with them. The following activities were done, like 2-day workshop for participants, 10-day workshop online. There is also a guide being developed. There are 90 people across Kazakhstan. And as those returnees are also in different parts of Kazakhstan, and psychologists and social workers have participated in a 10-day workshop jointly with UNICEF. There were a number of issues about the legal aspect, social work, social pedagogics, and also on work with eliminating aggressive behavior and other deviations in behavior that might be caused by this psychological trauma. We are also developing the manual on work with children who have been returned from the ZTA. This work is not just stop for, we will be ongoing the work with children, with specialists. We have our contacts, we know each other well, and we have conducted field visits to regions and have spoken with such managers, with specialists. So I think that by November, we believe we will be able to publish this manual. Number 4 is accompanying and consulting specialists. So that's the work that we do. Further, we have the following information. Half a year ago, I have published a methodological manual. So I have delivered for printing, but not published yet, to the Ministry of Education, Kazakh experience of social rehabilitation for children who suffered from terroristic activities, experience, problems, and perspectives. This is an attempt to adapt children and help those who will be dealing with this group of children. This is the first work on increasing knowledge about this subject matters. It's not a big publication, it's 120 pages publication where I try to explain and reflect everything I wanted to. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I will be ready during the Q&A session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Almat Nuradinov. Thank you very much for the very detailed and insightful presentation, and congratulations for the publication of this manual. I think it's very important work, and I hope that you can share with us also. I think in Europe, all practitioners from European countries also will be interested to read it. So indeed, Kazakhstan's rehabilitation program is very unique and more comprehensive compared to other countries. And I really appreciate also the partnership with civil society organizations in Kazakhstan and how the country mobilized practitioners such as psychologists, pedagogics, social workers, and theologians. And I would like to highlight the dedication and hard work of practitioners in Kazakhstan. Even during the COVID pandemic, they continued working online. And today, for example, we have with us Ms. Gulnaz Razdykova, one of the Kazakh practitioners. She, for example, continued working online during the pandemic on Zoom, providing psychological assistance to women returnees. And in the next workshop, Gulnaz will be speaking about women, female returnees. If you join us on 19th August, you can hear more about online working also, and how she worked with female returnees in Kazakhstan. So in general, Central Asian experience of repatriation and rehabilitation have drawn high attention from international community. International experts, researchers are traveling, especially to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And the main issue is local practitioners now need support, guidance, and mentorship. Today, we have two experts with us, Noah Tucker and Gavin Half. We'll hear from both of them today. First, I would like to invite Mr. Noah Tucker to reflect on his experience of visiting these countries, meeting with returnees, with practitioners, and he's closely working with local practitioners on the ground. Noah Tucker is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center and has been a program associate at the Elliott School of International Affairs since 2016. And he holds a master's degree from Harvard University. Dear Mr. Tucker, thank you for joining us. And could you share with us your observations about the experiences of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, maybe Kyrgyzstan as well? We know that you several times visited Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and met people with, you saw everything with your own eyes and met with returnees practitioners. So tell us your observations and how you evaluate, have you seen any outcomes, positive outcomes, and what kind of good practices you can highlight? Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you for having me today, and I want to thank the other speakers as well. Especially, it's always a wonderful opportunity to get to hear directly from people in the region, and in particular from those who have been directly involved in the work. As Chopin mentioned, I'm involved actually in a lot of the needs assessments for the project. So the US State Department's Counterterrorism Bureau has support grants that it's offered to most of the countries in the region, all of them except for Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan has work supported by various UN agencies and by USIP that we'll hear from Gavin from USIP here in just a moment. But I'm primarily a terrorism researcher, a PCVE researcher, and I've spent a lot of time working on how people were getting to the conflict, and now I spend most of my time working on questions of repatriation, reintegration, and rehabilitation. And so I've been pulled into a number of these projects to help lead the needs assessments for them originally and do an initial evaluation to see what's going well in the programs and what are some areas where they need some additional help, potentially from global best practices or from outside experts, or maybe just some additional financial support in some cases. So it's been a real privilege to get to visit a lot of the sites and centers and speak with a number of the returnees themselves. And I can say, I don't want to speak too much. It's really appropriate to give more of the floor to our local presenters today, but I can say, generally speaking, one of the takeaways that we can bring from Central Asia's experience is that, broadly speaking, it is very safe to return people to their communities. There's an argument, there's sort of a gamble, that this might be a security risk, and that when we weigh the potential security risks, that you're better off having people at home than in camps in Syria, or growing up in Iraqi orphanages, or left in an area where we don't know where their future will be. If the camps are dissolved in northern Syria, for example, and people disperse or are pulled back into armed groups, this presents a particular danger. And I know, in particular in Kazakhstan, as I understand, this kind of hard security concern was one of the initial factors that helped win over some in the Security Council who had doubts about this. And these are things that continue to be repeated in the West as other countries consider to return people. So one of the things that we find is that it's safe and by and large very successful. And they're safe and successful. One of the other encouraging things that we find in the programs in Central Asia is that you can have all kinds of different programmatic approaches, but by and large, if you're able to return people to communities that are welcoming and to families that are willing to support them and who are eager to have them back, it may not be, of course, this is not to minimize any of the very important things that the programs do, particularly in Kazakhstan, where there's been so much effort put into creating a really all-around program. But so you need some kind of program, but there's different approaches that you can take. And those different approaches, as long as they tend to focus on providing for basic needs and establishing support networks, and especially helping people to reintegrate, not necessarily into the community that they came out of, but into a new community in their home country. They've by and large been very successful, even if they take different approaches. For example, the Kazakhstani program is largely focused around ideological rehabilitation, where the program in Uzbekistan had no element of that at all. And they had relatively similar success rates overall, if we're measuring success as from the point of view of security and helping people to reintegrate into the communities that they came out of. So some of the key elements that we do see are these networks of support, and in particular, multidimensional support that comes from not just a psychologist, not just a theologian, not just a parole officer, but ensuring that people's basic needs are met, ensuring that they have someone to turn to when they have problems, ensuring that their health, and to what extent is that it's possible their mental health needs are met. And I can't really sort of emphasize enough how key it worked out to be. This should perhaps not be surprising, that just really basic initial needs are met, whether that's schooling for children, or whether that's specialized medical care that some of the returnees have needed, particularly given the environment that they came out of. There are one of the other really positive elements that we see even in places where we might not expect it, like in Uzbekistan, a country that at least before 2016 had a very justly earned reputation as an extremely authoritarian and closed country that had almost destroyed what was left of its civil society. But one of the most important decisions that the government of Uzbekistan made was to partner with existing civil society organizations to provide these networks of support and multidimensional support. And it was, by and large, a really remarkably successful effort that we saw out of this joining of both government officials and civil society organizations. In Kazakhstan, we see a very well-funded and comprehensive government effort, but that was also complemented in a lot of communities by informally organized local Islamic civil society that would help provide clothing and homes and a variety of other basic material needs. So that joint effort between government and civil society and specialist actors was very important. Another really, what strikes me at least as a key element for success in Central Asia, where things are successful, are allowing returnees to create networks among themselves and within their broader communities. This is something that there are, as people consider policy approaches to take to things, this is something that some experts have quite strong feelings about, that this shouldn't happen, that allowing returnees to continue to maintain close networks among themselves might cause them to re-radicalize one another, or might hamper their ability to reintegrate into other communities. But what we've seen by and large in Central Asia, especially where we see these networks, is the opposite, that they can sometimes be among the best support to one another, because they've lived through the same situation, they understand things about one another and the things that they've lived through that others don't, and that giving them that level of support can help them reintegrate into broader mainstream society more often than it hinders it. And overall, one of the great advantages to Central Asia that can't necessarily be reproduced in other places, of course, are the close community contacts and the center, the idea of community values and collective values, and the need for the whole community to take responsibility, in particular for children, and to welcome back children, seeing them, primarily children in particular, as innocent victims in this situation, and coming together to support them. But that being said, we also see a fairly high degree of stigmatization. And so that's where one of the steps that I'm very thankful was mentioned for Kazakhstan, of allowing children in particular to be fully anonymized by, in some cases, creating birth certificates to say that they were born in Kazakhstan. So their birth in Syria or their birth in Iraq won't follow them around for the rest of their lives. It was a really important step and a real insight that the country showed, and that the leadership of the rehabilitation program showed. I'll speak just briefly, I guess, on some of the challenges that we see in it. And probably one of the most important ones is to remember that rehabilitation and reintegration from the really extremely difficult situation that many of both women and children have come back from is not something that can be accomplished in just a year or just in 2 years. It's really important to have a long-term perspective on these things. For some people, they prefer, they are doing well on their own. Maybe even for the majority of people, after spending 2 years in a program and with some kind of formalized support, they may be ready to return back to normal life, and they'd like to forget that they were ever different than anyone else, and they can successfully forge on with the new life and the new identity that they formed. But that won't be true for everyone. And one of the categories of people for whom this is particularly true, if we look at other contexts, and this is something that Dr. Steve Wine, a psychiatrist who specializes in particular in integration of refugees and reintegration of people from war zones, and who is with Dr. Heidi Ellis, the head of the program for Kazakhstan support funded by the State Department. One of the things that he has frequently brought up, particularly given the experiences and a lot of documented research that they've done in the Somali community in the United States, is that adolescence is going to be a particularly challenging time. And as we have a large number of children who are between, say, 8 and 11 years old at this point, they're going to begin to form their own identities. They're going to begin to ask very hard questions about where their fathers are, how they ended up there, why some of them were born in Syria or Iraq. They're going to look for their own meanings in these things, and particularly for boys whose fathers were killed or whose fathers are currently in prison. This is going to be a challenge for both the parents and for the community supports to understand how to guide them through this period, forming a new identity for themselves, and being able to deal with the contradictions that are present in this. And overall, I think one of the other basic lessons that we take away from these things is that it's really important not to forget the very basics. This includes, in some cases, even food security. There's been a concern because, in part, the governments did a really good thing, bringing people back, even though there wasn't necessarily a great deal of public support in some cases for these programs and for these decisions. There's been a real fear of the potential for extra stigmatization that could come if people are seen as receiving too much material, financial, or physical support from governments. And one of the unintended results of that is that more families than we might expect in some cases are living extremely precariously in terms of their incomes, in terms of their ability to really construct a solid foundation for a new life for themselves and for their children. And in some countries, we even see some degree of food insecurity. And so this is something that it's a challenge that's a difficult one to solve. How do we ensure we meet needs without either breaking people's anonymity or creating extra stigmatization or resentment on the behalf of the population around them? But it's an important one to solve. Because if we bring people back and aren't able to provide for the basic things that they need, then not all of the goals of the program are being filled. If we want to say it sort of as diplomatically as possible that way. So thank you for your time. I'll be happy to join in discussion later.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tucker. It's indeed good to hear takeaways from the international expert. And as you said, rehabilitation is a long-term goal. And also, as you said, it's safe to return, but rehabilitation is difficult but possible. So, dear participants, please leave your questions in the Zoom chat. And soon we will be starting Q&A session. Now I want to turn to Mr. Gavin Half. He is a senior expert on Central Asia for the United States Institute for Peace, where he works on Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Before joining USAID, Dr. Half worked as a senior democracy and governance advisor in the USAID Asia and Middle East bureaus. So you might know that United States Institute for Peace is doing a great job about returnees in Central Asia, and most importantly, they are funding local NGOs. They are supporting local practitioners. So, Mr. Half, I know that you are funding now, helping local organizations on the ground, and recently you visited Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Could you tell us about your observations, how the rehabilitation programs are going on the ground? Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chulpan. Thank you to the Bulan Institute as well. It's great to see many of my colleagues and many of my teachers on this Zoom. I just very briefly want to give some impressions and also give a little bit of a perspective of international donors and international policymakers about why this work, especially in Central Asia, is still important and will continue to be important. As Chulpan mentioned, USIP has worked under the C5+1 rubric already now maybe 3 years, I think, to bring together people working on this set of issues since the very beginning of Operation Zhusan and Operation Meher in Uzbekistan. And so, we are committed to the learning across the different countries as part of that initiative. We also support local non-governmental organizations in Kyrgyzstan and Aravan, working with children, and in Uzbekistan, Istiqbal Avlot, working with reintegration of women and children. But the first thing I want to do is sort of give a little quick perspective on why work with returnees is so important for international donors. Noah mentioned that he and I, we've worked together on preventing violent extremism and combating violent extremism for going on 10 years now. One of the really hard things about doing prevention work is that you're always chasing after very large numbers of people who are vulnerable groups. So, an example is when we discovered 10 years ago that we saw labor migrants from Central Asia and Russia being vulnerable to recruitment by terrorist organizations. That was a target group of 6 to 10 million labor migrants. How do you work with that? When we're talking about returnees, we're talking about a very discrete, very small number of people. 79 kids in Kyrgyzstan, 84 kids in Tajikistan. Something in the low hundred, the hundreds to the thousands, which is a group of people that we can identify and work with over time. The second big problem for international donors and policymakers in justifying funding work in CVE is it's always hard to measure your results. If you're trying to prevent violent extremism, it's almost impossible to measure a negative result. So, the number of people who didn't join the Islamic State is a number we can never measure. With returnees, we are able to put in place in the long term ways to track success. Are the kids in school? Are the women-led households still together? Do they have all of their basic needs met? What percentage of the kids are doing well? We can measure those things. And then, of course, the third one, which is a very big one, is the cost effectiveness of this. When you are trying to prevent recruitment among labor migrants in Russia or youth, you can spend millions and millions of dollars, but it still comes down to a very small amount of dollars per person. When we're talking about this small number of returnees, those dollars are going to be much more effectively spent. So that's why this work is important. I think it's important that we remember the returnees will become a model. If they succeed, it's a model of success. If they fail, it's a model of what went wrong. And we have a real opportunity here as international donors and as a community of practitioners to make a big difference in preventing violent extremism and preventing radicalization going forward. So as Chopin mentioned, I visited with some of my colleagues. We went to Aravan. In Aravan right now, we are working with Progress Aravan, a local NGO, to provide over the summer some educational backfill, working again, like Juldi's mentioned, we're working on tutoring with mathematics, with language, and with literature, and making every effort to keep these kids engaged over the summer and get them up to grade level as much as possible going into the new academic year. We will probably continue this work. We'll probably expand it geographically, but I wanted to share a couple of my impressions from that trip. First of all, I see in the case of the kids being reintegrated in Kyrgyzstan that there is a real lack of closure with the mothers and with, in some cases, the fathers. One of the things that we heard over and over again, especially from the guardians, from the apakuns, which are often grandparents, when can we bring the mothers home? When can we bring the mothers home? You need to bring the mothers home. Looking at us, international donors, sort of, why don't you bring the mothers home? Somebody try to figure out how to do that. We heard of cases of kids who still maintain contact with their mothers in using WhatsApp, FaceTime, etc., with their mothers who are incarcerated in Iraq. And it seems to me that that's often an open wound that's very hard to close. We heard a story of one young lady, one child who was talking to her mother and talking about the Nowruz festival that they had just conducted, and that her mother had a bad reaction to that on a Zoom call, saying, you shouldn't dance, in public, and you shouldn't be involved with social activities with boys. So as you can see, I think, in the long term, being able to find some closure with those mothers and fathers, dead or alive, that remained in Iraq and now Syria, is really important. And that was a message that we heard repeatedly in the context of a story of very good overall integration. And I think it points out one of the differences in the efforts in Kyrgyzstan and up until now Tajikistan versus Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which is the unit of reintegration in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan has been the unaccompanied child, whereas the unit of reintegration in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is mostly women-led, female-led households with children or without. As we see Tajikistan now beginning to return both women and children, and as Kyrgyzstan looks at bringing women and children back from Al-Hol and from Syria, I think it's really important to learn what we can learn from Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan's experience in the reintegration of female-led households and that closure for Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And I encourage, and we will support at USIP the sharing of that experience across those country lines. And then finally, I wanted to repeat and emphasize something that Noah said. Although this problem, like COVID, is something we would like to have solved and look back on as a success, there are no Disney endings in this. There's no time where we roll the credits and say they lived happily ever after. This is an ongoing long-term problem which is likely to shift and change as children grow, as men are released from prison. I want to say certainly USIP, but also foreign donors, Western donors, American donors will very much be with you in these coming years as we try to figure out what this looks like in the long term. Happily ever after is something that we have to continue to build. And with that, I'll give it back to Chulpan. Thank you.
All right, so this concludes our workshop on good practices in rehabilitation and reintegration of children returnees. I would like to thank our speakers, Yıldız Dushenova, Farzona Sharifzoda, Noah Tucker, and Almat Nuradinov. I also thank Gavin Health and also our diplomat from the Kyrgyz permanent mission in Geneva and other colleagues who made interventions and asked questions. And your contributions to this discussion were fascinating, and hopefully this conversation will help other policymakers and other countries who plan to repatriate and rehabilitate their citizens. And thank you for taking time and joining us. And we will be hosting next workshop on 19th August, and we'll discuss rehabilitation of female returnees. So if you have questions to the Bulan Institute, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And in the meantime, I wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are. And we look forward to hosting events with you in the future. Thank you. Bye.